Carolyn, so great to have you. I'm so excited to chat today. You and I actually met a long time ago. I think in really like the original 2014 days in New York in the blockchain space. And since then, you've done some really interesting things. So you were first like a chief of staff at Lean Gap, and then went to Fabric and was an advisor at Casting Coin, and ultimately was like very early Consensus, so director of global ops. Went to Casa, and then now are leading as a chief operating officer at Thesis, while also working on a really cool project that I'm excited to touch base a little bit on as well, in the female wellness space and body. So there's just so much that you've done, especially like a deep experience in blockchain. And I can't wait to share all of that here. So first off, where are you calling from today? Where are you based? And what is your main focus these days?
First off, thank you, Alana, for having me on. I am based in New York, Brooklyn, and my main focus these days, so you mentioned Thesis, which is a venture studio. I have been with them for about 4 years, most recently in the COO role. Thesis is a venture studio that does Web3 projects. So really what we say is we do freedom tech. We've done some stuff in Bitcoin, some projects in DeFi, but right now working on a project called Embody, which actually technically is more of a Web2 project because it's focused on encryption and not like cryptocurrencies yet. But what it does is essentially allows women to have fully encrypted health data, specifically for their menstrual cycle. So nowadays, most women who have a menstrual cycle use period tracking apps. What a lot of people don't know is that those apps are not usually security focused. So what we're trying to build here is think of it like a signal for women's health data for period tracking. We live in a post Roe v. Wade world here in the United States, and folks might not think about the fact that if you live in one of these states where Roe v. Wade was overturned, your data that you enter into a period tracker could be used against you, could be subpoenaed in the case of a suspected abortion. And I'm working with Anna Hall, who's the founder of this project, very closely in this studio model, and helping to bring this sort of data privacy to the women's health world. So that's what I'm focusing on the most right now. We have some other projects that I work on, but that's the one that I'm most excited about today.
And is Embody part of the Thesis ecosystem?
It is, yeah.
Super exciting. I know that was a thing we bonded on recently in Austin, because I think we're all using these trackers in such a crazy way. Like I have an Aura ring, I do my cycle syncing with, and there's just such a need to protect, I think to your point, this information, and that data is more and more valuable. I think it's so interesting because your background, like I think one, you've been working in the startup accelerator space for so long. Lean Gap was a summer program for high school students to start building startups, which was 2015, and then went into Fabric, which was all about reputation and community governance, which I think is so cool because when you think about like reputation and data sovereignty and how we use like the data around us to evaluate things, that's so reflected in Embody. So I love that through line. I'm curious if there are others. Like, how did you go from startup space into blockchain space, especially Consensus in particular? Like, how did you hear about Fabric? How did you hear about Consensus? And like, what made you take that leap, especially in like a very early period, right? 2015 was pretty early on.
Yeah. I might even like go back a bit further in my background and to know that before I was involved in Lean Gap or doing anything in startups and tech, I actually worked in the mental health space. I was a therapist for a couple of years right out of school. So like totally different realm. But I always was very interested in technology. I essentially knew that I wanted to work on something that wasn't so clinical and focus on changing the world and making people's lives better in more of a macro sense. So I was living in Boston at the time, and that's how I got into like very small and welcoming like startup community in Boston. And I also got into blockchain, learned about these crazy things called smart contracts and the Ethereum blockchain, which was just a white paper at that point in 2014, didn't exist. I joined Lean Gap and was using some of my like clinical skills to build that program. But at the same time, learning a lot about the startup ecosystem and just like going out to meetups and learning as much as I could, shaking as many hands as I could. I eventually met some folks who were forming a working group around like smart contracts and identity and the law. These are some folks that were at MIT Media Lab, also at the Berkman Center for Internet and Society at Harvard Law. So like really more academics and people just kind of at the cutting edge of like, let's do some research around what blockchain technology could be outside of just Bitcoin, outside of just the financial use cases. And to me, as psychologist, social scientist by training, really fascinating when applied to some of the coordination problems of the internet. So in 2014, 2015, like it just kind of clicked for me what Web3, and wasn't called that at this point. It was, blockchain technology, like what that could mean, what Ethereum and this concept of a global world computer, smart contracts, what that could mean for the future of coordination, the future of the internet. And Fabric was actually a hackathon project that I started with some folks that ended up being the first employees at Consensus. Consensus is, huge, big venture studio working on Ethereum, but it really started out as the first for-profit like venture working on Ethereum. So I was lucky that project and the folks working on it quickly got sucked into Consensus and was able to work with, just the few dozen people who were working on Ethereum at the time, mostly at Consensus, 2015, 2016. And that's where I really cut my teeth on like learning how to, validate ideas and operate very early stage startups. And I got hooked on that like 0 to 1 phase. And that's why I'm still, working at a venture studio. And I really like to do that early stage, like get something out there and proven. And then do it all again.
I was gonna say, and there's so many cycles, right, that have come from that, ups and downs. And so like continuing that through line and endurance through those ups and downs is pretty, takes resilience. And I didn't actually realize that you had this background as a therapist. And so it's even more interesting that now you're kind of going into this world of like the medical, like tech space. Full circle, super interesting. What do you feel like have been the biggest lessons you've learned in the world of incubating ideas in blockchain over this period, right? Whether in Consensus, which was essentially like an incubator for the Ethereum ecosystem, and then Thesis, which is doing all sorts of things in self-sovereignty across blockchains. What have you noticed as like the key insights that you think are really interesting to note?
Yeah, so a lot of insights in a lot of different areas. I think the venture studio and the incubator model is one that works really well for emerging or niche technologies. So Web3, crypto is a perfect fit because we are so early, right? And there are a lot of use cases that have been thrown out since very early days, some of which have come to fruition, right? Like NFTs and like the art use case was an early one. We've seen that happen, of course, like DeFi and all of the different waves of tokenization and ICOs and how we eventually got here. And now we're seeing like DAOs and these, community coordination and gaming and all of these things. There's still a lot of use cases that haven't been proven out. But that's why, that venture model is one that works. I've seen it, work well for other niche industries, like if you're looking at maybe like clean tech or like health tech, things like that. So that's been one insight, one learning. And I think another one that's been interesting is specifically around Web3 and incubating lots of projects is community. So community is a resource, I'd say, in crypto that is very unique, right? I think you have communities and community managers in Web2 and in other industries, but that's really more connected to like a growth and marketing cycle. In crypto, it's so much deeper than that. Community it's like, it's your users, and sometimes like it is your entire growth and marketing cycle, not just a piece of it. And there's just so many unique ways to innovate in a community and sort of use communities to bootstrap new ideas and new products and to validate things within communities. That's been a big theme throughout my career.
Who do you think's done that really well in terms of using community as like an asset for like successful acceleration of their ideas?
What we've seen in like the DAOs that came out of the NFT boom, like last year. Was that last year? Yeah, it was last year. Sometimes it's crazy in the crypto space. So like Pleaser DAO, for example, and some of the DAOs and projects that came out of that, they really, listened to their community, and there were a lot of interesting like projects and like campaigns that came out of that, and some money that was raised for some interesting causes, and also like new DAOs and projects.
I like that. It's a really good one. I think that's where we saw that real explosion of community as like the asset, because the whole point was like the tokenization of community, basically things like FWB, and to your point, like Pleaser DAO or Flamingo DAO. So fascinating. What do you feel like is your hot take now, if you're going to say like your one controversial opinion about where the world's going, like where we'll be in 5-10 years?
I do think I'm a big believer in that the next greatest like social app, social movement will be on Web3, whether people know it or not. I think Friend Tech is a great example of this. Something that probably one of the few things that I've gotten very excited about recently. I know we're in a bear, but seeing the non-crypto native users, right? So folks coming over more from like the entertainment space, like OnlyFans and folks like that using this tech. That to me is a signal that social is going to be moving in this Web3 direction.
I love that take. I think that's super interesting. And Friend.Tech has been one of the most kind of viral things that have come out in this bear market. So it's a really great example. Are there any other companies or people or projects that are really inspiring you right now that you're diving into, especially as you're exploring like new verticals, new use cases, and things that like might go into the Thesis ecosystem? What do you keep track of, or where do you get your information in a way that others might follow?
So I'm still bullish on crypto Twitter, or X, or whatever you want to call it. That's still, to me, where I started getting in my information years ago, and where I'll still hang out. In terms of things that I'm excited about, we are in a bear market, so things are slower. But like you said, I've seen so many of these ups and downs, and honestly, these quiet times are kind of my favorite for heads down building. And it's really when you see progress get made. Like I think that the progress we've seen with L2s, just really like solidifying and becoming a thing. ZK tech, privacy tech is huge. I'm a big got my eyes on protocols like Aztec and Alio, and also liquid staking, right, with ETH. To get kind of technical, I think that there's some interesting stuff going on there. Obviously, everyone knows, people know Lido. That's kind of the original liquid staking with ETH, but like Eigenlayer is really interesting. So yeah, there's definitely some like nerdy tech stuff that is making, big progress in the Web3 space. And if you're interested, now is like a nice quiet time to like catch up and learn about all that stuff.
I love those. Those are some really amazing things to reference, which we'll link in the transcript so people can check them out. I'd love to go back to Embody, because I do, like I mentioned, think it's really connected to where you've been and where you think the world is going. And you mentioned that right now it's not really crypto, right? It's encrypted tech. Could you talk a little bit about like what has inspired this as something in like the Thesis portfolio? Like, where do you think this could go? And even beyond like femtech, where you feel like maybe even like medical data as an industry might go, and like why this has become a focus area of yours?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think medical data and the ownership of data and privacy and all these like tenets that blockchain, Web3 tech promise. People have been trying to think about like how medical information and medical data can become self-sovereign since beginning of crypto days, and I think we're now just seeing little pieces of it because it's a hard problem. Like the medical industrial complex is quite daunting, but I think some of these consumer plays, femtech, health tech is definitely the place to start. And I think with Embody, the goal is really to provide women with an app where they can learn about and their bodies, their menstrual cycles. The app also focuses a lot on cycle syncing, which is a trend in the women's health space and the wellness space. So that's really focusing, if you're not familiar, focusing on the 4 different phases of menstrual cycle and really doing some like optimized self kind of hacking for like learning about like best diet, exercise, like self-care, just self-management tips for knowing your cycle and knowing yourself better. So it does that, but it does it in a way where it's completely private. All of your data is locally hosted on your phone, on your device, not going to a cloud. And that's like the default setting, which every other app on the market, the other way around, like nothing is ever private by default. And so that's the, what we're trying to provide with the Embody app is something that like flips that paradigm and really allows women to have control over their own data, which is really important for something as like, intimate as your cycle.
Yeah, I obviously heard some fake news recently about Flow having, operations or employees in Russia, and I just did a quick like research search to check that. But I do think it's interesting to be aware of and mindful of like where your data is going. And I'm curious, what your plans are for Embody, like any thoughts you have on even things like Aura Ring, right? Like, how do we get that data into something like Embody where, I haven't seen anything other than like natural cycles really come out with like, other than having to wear like a whole armband for temperature tracking. I'm curious if you have that on your roadmap or any thoughts on that in the future of where that will all go.
Yeah, it's really interesting. We haven't, gotten too far thinking about like the hardware and the wearables and the health data. Really, we're focusing on building something that is more just like women's self-reported data. But I do think it's interesting to see the trends in like the like that quantified self movements. It's definitely related. Wellness and health tech. Hardware hardware is hard, and sort of and privacy around that is a bit of a different ball game. But like it's definitely something that we'd consider in the future if people are interested in it. We're actually running a like a beta right now for Embody. So it's small, semi-private, but we're like taking feedback from folks on the app and hearing about what they like and what they don't like. So yeah, I would love to share the beta with your listeners too.
I love it. I know I've got the link now and I'm in the process of joining that beta as we speak. And I'd love just, for like the last question, just what would you give as advice for somebody starting maybe in the quantified self movement who wants to be more aware of where their data is going and how to leverage technologies of encryption and blockchain data to be thoughtful about who they partner with in that process?
Yeah, that's great question. So in the women's health space, there really aren't very many projects that are, thinking about data and focusing on data privacy. I think Embody is probably one of the only project out there that's like fully encrypted and focuses just on menstrual health and wellness. Apple does have probably the best track record out of all of the big tech giants out there, to be fair. They're still like closed system. What Embody does differently is that we're completely open source. So you can go and check out our code. Not that everybody like can, but just like the fact that if you want to and it's there, you can, don't trust but verify and check it out yourself on GitHub.
I love that. That's so important. I think such a big movement that we're starting to see around open source and transparency and visibility. Well, I know I've just downloaded Embody. I'm very excited to use it. How can we keep in touch? We'll share the information about how to potentially be part of the beta, but just with you personally as somebody who's constantly incubating in the space and thinking about big ideas and where the future is going, how can we keep in touch with you, Thesis, and Embody?
Yes. So I'm on Twitter, X, whatever you want to call it, at Reckhow. So it's my first initial last name. Thesis, the venture studio is thesis.co, or I think thesis_co on Twitter. And Embody, if you're interested, embody.space, and Embody space, one word, on Twitter.
Amazing. Well, we will definitely be following along. Thanks so much for this conversation. I think it's really special what you've been building and for a long, long time. So I can't wait to see what you do next. And we'll definitely be in touch.
Thanks, Lana.
Thanks so much, Carolyn.